what I announce is the formation of the Deleuze Studies in India Collective. It's a new initiative. The office bearers, you won't be surprised to hear, are President George Varghese and the Secretary Manoj NY.
Aditi, you may begin.
Good evening, everyone, and I warmly welcome you all to Non-Plenary Session 9 on Ecosophic Futures and Anthropocene. Our esteemed chair for the session is Dr. Sandhya Devison. Dr. Sandhya Devison is an academic and author based in India. She is currently an assistant professor in the Department of English at Jesus and Mary College, Delhi University. She has studied English literature and philosophy at Lady Shri Ram College, Delhi University, and Jawaharlal Nehru University. Her research work focuses on conceptual history and literature and post-Kantian continental philosophy with an abiding focus on Deleuze and Gathuri. Now I request Dr. Devison to take over the session. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and good morning and good afternoon, according to your time zones. I'm very, very glad to be here and chairing the session of this present conference on the Deleuze and Gathuri conference this year. And I'm really looking forward to all the papers in this current session. And without further ado, I'm just going to read out the bios of everyone who's presenting today. And I'm quite looking forward to all the papers. And it seems like this is right up my alley. I would have liked to present in the session today as well. But Manoj has asked me to chair. So I'm doing the honors. So we have today Daniela Carolina Ernst, who earned her degree in biological sciences and is a specialist in biotechnology, teaching of the natural sciences, mathematics, and technologies related to games and digital tools. She holds a master's in science teaching and is a PhD student in science at the University of Sao Paulo. Ernst's research focuses on the curriculum of science teaching from the perspective of differential philosophy apropos Deleuze, Guattari, Derrida, and Foucault. Currently, she focuses on research in decolonization. Her areas of interest include environmental education, bioethics, art and education, art and science, philosophy of science. She is a member of the interdisciplinary group of studies and research in education at the Instituto Federal Farroupilha and various, other networks and universities and the School of Communications and Arts. She's currently a PhD candidate in the postgraduate program in the Humanities, Rights and Other Legitimacies, USP. We have Mallika Dastidar, who is an associate professor at the Center for Comparative Politics and Political Theory, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Her areas of interest include liberalism and minority cultures, politics of modernity, tribal citizens in India, and international studies. Her book, Understanding Nepal, Muslims in a Plural Society, which looks at the historic transition of Nepal from a monolithic Hindu kingdom to a multicultural democracy. Her work has also appeared in the likes of The Wire and the Economic and Political Weekly. Ishtiaq Ahmed Levin is a PhD candidate in the Center for the Study of Social Systems, CSSS, in the School of Social Sciences, JNU. His doctoral research seeks to understand recent theoretical debates on the Anthropocene in the context of South Asia. His research areas include critical Anthropocene studies, decolonial studies, environmental justice, political eco-philosophy, environmental humanities, indigenous studies, and post-humanism. And of course, Levin and I, we share, among others, the administration of a group on the Anthropocene on Facebook. So that's another connection that we both have. I mean, greetings to everyone here, and I welcome all of you to the session. And I think we can go on to have the first paper presentation right away.
Molika, you can start.
I thought there was a presentation before me, Manoj.
Unfortunately, that presenter has withdrawn from the session because of some domestic issues.
I see.
Yeah. So you may start.
Okay, so I guess the introduction was gathered from the net, but I did send you an introduction. Anyway, that doesn't matter. Okay, so we were hearing about Daniela, her long list. And unfortunate that she is not here. I was looking forward to listening to her. Okay, so without then taking much time, I must begin thanking George Verghese and Manoj very much for allowing me to come in at very late because I was very, very busy with the chairpersonship of my center, and I could not really key into the long list of mails that I had received. So they're very, very kind to allow my paper at the very last moment. So thank you, George. Thank you, Manoj. And it was indeed a very, very wonderful experience in the last year's first Deleuze and Guattari World Conference that we had in Delhi. And I wish we can get back to our interpersonal and person-to-person contact once again. I miss the philosophers whom I met there, though I can see Alex through virtual screen. Okay, so it would be perhaps wonderful to, if we could connect certain dots that were highlighted in the opening sessions of this very good, very August conference. And they were done by Professor Sarukai, Professor Raghuram Raju, Paul Patton, and they were pretty exhaustive topics, and especially the range of the topics. So if before I begin my presentation, I would like to connect certain dots. And my suggestion is to relate my argument on the lived practices of self-governing communities to some of the larger Deleuzean concerns that were highlighted in the inaugural session. For instance, Deleuze's position on organic social unity of humans. Deleuzean belief that human beings are naturally social and harmonious, and his skepticism for social contract and formation of legal institutions of power. The origins of many such republican institutions, such as law, bureaucracy, citizens we keep teaching this, are also the origins of arbitrary authoritarianism and corruption. My paper also relates to the Deleuzean principle of contingent reason, and that there is no one good reason to be universalized, but contingent reasons, and that there is no one universal history, but contingencies. Now, before I formally start reading my paper for time discipline, there are some little clarifications which I would like to make regarding the title of my paper. The title of my paper draws attention to the ecosystems of multiple knowledge worlds as opposed to the only knowledge world of modern reason. It also draws attention to the hierarchization of values, where collective good and not individual good, and biodiverse interest and not anthropocentric interest are at the heart. It also draws our attention to the lived practices of ecosystem preservation as found in practices of the indigenous peoples and the recalcitrant farmers and peasants in semi-industrialized societies. So after making that clarification, may I start just quickly read my paper in order to maintain the time. Let me begin by asking a question, and that is, can there be universalism of social scientific theory or objective social knowledge that can universally explain A, nature of human society, B, the economy, and C, social and political actions? In seeking the answers, it may be noted that following the success of the natural sciences in the 17th and 18th century Europe, social inquiry and social philosophy began seriously engaging with similar natural sciences methods to attain objective social knowledge. It may be briefly mentioned here that the early rationalists or the 19th century thinkers like J.S. Mill had based their explanation of nature of human societies onto the empiricist theory of knowledge, meaning only those statements which could be empirically verified can be considered as true knowledge. The task of objective scientific inquiry therefore had to always seek empirically knowable phenomena. Later, the hermeneutic approach to social theory came up with the explanation that since society is not a fixed, determinate external structure that affect human consciousness in a regular, predictable, and knowable way, there cannot be any objective source of truth. Rather, there can only be a process of interpreting the subjective intentions of human as they act in complex, changing, and context-bound ways. But a more relativistic argument asserted that all empirical inquiry, whether about natural world or human society, takes place within specific intellectual and cultural traditions and hence involves subjective, value-laden judgments. There can be an objective natural science, but not an objective natural scientist, Karl Popper reminded us. Relativists pointed out that all scientific rational explanations are but provisional rational explanations. Their scientific character depended on their being open to constant testing, interrogation by different premises. The PRE, or the provisional rational explanation, underlined the fact of diversity of a scientific truth. For it was possible that most rational explanation within a particular geographic, cultural, traditional setting may change and can come up with a different rational explanation when tested with different premises and properties in another cultural setting. The universalism of scientific reason, even for the natural world, therefore is conditional upon its openness to be tested again in different circumstances. Hence, the only way the objectivity of a scientific inquiry can be maintained by constantly testing the findings in a different geographical setting impacted by biological, as in physicality, immunity, to cultural, as in eating habits and faith-based stability of mind, to the climatic conditions. To take a few examples, the Nobel Prize winner evidence-based theory of economics that was designed to monitor the economic health of a society can very well come up with a divergent explanation while applying same economic parameters. As explained by the prize-winning economist Abhijit Banerjee, that a particular economic problem in India cannot be studied in the same manner as in Indonesia, even though the same evidence-based theory is applied in both the cases, simply because of the divergent social cultural factors. The latest example of the vaccine preparations for COVID-19 perhaps provide the most crucial example of how the same scientific theory needs to be applied discreetly and selectively, keeping in mind the distinctive biological and cultural traits. Thus, coming back to my original question regarding objective/scientific social knowledge and its universality, in understanding the nature of human society, one can simply claim without hesitation that all empirical inquiry-based scientific knowledge is contingent upon the cultural and social conditions. I come to my second section called ecosophy, quote unquote, over technoscientific solutions of climate chaos. The biggest lesson that COVID-19 pandemic taught us is money cannot save our lives, especially if we are in our congested mega urban existences. But nature, with its vastness and unpolluted air, can still save us. At the very outset of his long essay and long and famous essay, The Three Ecologies, Gathuri alerts us that the intense technoscientific transformation is largely responsible for ecological disequilibrium that our Earth is experiencing, and that this ecological crisis will require no less than a social, cultural, and political revolution at a global scale. Quoting from the path-breaking work of Gregory Bateson, Ecology of Minds, 1972, that pointed out the epistemological error of Western civilization that led to the theory of species versus species around it, or species versus its environment. Bateson affirms that the unit of survival is organism plus environment. And Gathuri brings in the parallel of this Batesonian argument in his essay written in 2000. Gathuri proposes that the ecology of bad ideas should be altered with an incorporeal value system, a value system that is born out of knowledge, culture, and sensibility subjectivity. He also identifies the task that of transforming human subjectivity from their dominant capitalistic subjectivity to an ethical, political, value-oriented subject. One may, however, highlight here that in his force, and I have done this before, and in my writings, there are special articles in Economic and Political Weekly. Both the series of special articles have done it, which I have pointed out that in his forceful argument for a futuristic ecosophical project, Gathuri does remain oblivious of several non-capitalistic contingencies of indigenous ecologies. Indigenous communities all around the world with their ecosystems of knowledge, values, and biodiverse practices are already showing the world that it is only through living by ecological ethics and human species can still save themselves by forestalling the warming of the planet triggered by the universalization of industrial modernity and its greenhouse gases. Today, as the project of deep modernization and its technoscientific remedies fail to tackle the life-threatening industrial pollution, all that the modern humans need to do is to learn from lived practices of the non-modern people, still waging several battles to save their natural surroundings against the universalism of carbon-induced modern living. It is this non-capitalistic contingencies of indigenous ecologies in the rainforest of Amazon, in the pockets of Central America, in New Zealand, in Zomia Hills of Southeast Asia, in the rarest biodiverse zones of Eastern Himalayas, where local habitants are showing the world how to live by replenishing and not devouring nature as required by capitalism. My final section on necessary contingencies. Bringing forth the delusion assertion that there is no universal history except as contingencies, and that there is no universal reason but contingent reasons, is important to reiterate and remind us as in we find also amongst the advocates of modern scientific reason and progress, the two factors that give legitimacy to the capital-based production and distribution, and hence to capitalism as a global system, that it has become inevitable for us to engage with the different rationalities and ethics. Those that tell us natural world doesn't belong to the humans, rather we humans belong to the natural world. And if we continue to destroy the ecological balance, humans can also become extinct like other species have in the past. It is the ecosystems of different rationalities and of non-anthropogenic value-based customs and rituals instrumental for preserving forests, hills, and sources of water in their pristine forms, as well as traditional wisdom that had already made generations aware that organism that destroy its environment destroy itself. That Betsonian wisdom came in 72. The ontological or particularistic way of nature, as the debate between ontology and epistemology has pointed out, the ontological or particularistic ways / nature of being, be it our own forms of being or lives of other beings and the natural world, more often do not conform to the rationally articulated claims or rationalities. While among the humans, the phenomena of experience and affective emotions become crucial factors that defy scientific structuralist explanations. With the natural world, the laws of nature present divergent properties and traits of similar biological species in different climatic and cultural conditions. Thus, the universalism of scientific reason is but an imposition of the dogma of one scientific truth. It was made possible, universalization of a particular reason was made possible by colonization of different knowledge worlds and distinctive subjectivities. The universalism or the authoritarianism of one scientific reason defy even the very basis of scientific objectivity that is open to testing with different properties and premises, and that all scientific rational explanations are but provisional rational explanations. Let me come back to the vaccine story once more quickly. As the scientific debates have shown us how in certain geographic conditions and with certain food and cultural habits, the viruses and the bacteria found in latent state in human bodies vary distinctively. Therefore, the vaccine with the active pneumonia virus properties could have life-threatening risk for the people in North Europe or for people in wet and cold climatic conditions, whereas the same vaccine may prove effective for people in warmer regions where more common and latent bacteria are there in the human body are that of diarrhea. Significantly enough, a vaccine brand that was banned by most of the North European countries where pneumonia is common ailment was most widely used in a warmer country like India. Even then, the cold and wet Himalayan state of Sikkim recorded several sudden deaths after being vaccinated with the same brand that was banned in North Europe with pneumonia condition, underlining the fact that even in natural science, the objectivity of scientific results would vary in contingent climatic conditions and cultural conditions. The inevitability of ontological particularities, both in the natural and human world, do point towards the hollow and empty universalism of a hegemonic worldview being legitimized by the colonial modernity in the colonized world. The non-modern and non-universal knowledge worlds of indigenous civilizations are the only cultures that have resisted colonization and thus have saved some of their natural habitats. Unfortunately, it is the superiority and the universalism of that techno-scientific knowledge that nurtures and sustains the profit economies all over the world has most successfully colonized the mind and reason of the modern or modernizing world. So much so that we have driven the planet to a condition of climate emergency. The imperative, therefore, is to opt for and learn from the principles of contingent reasons and expose the bluff of a particularistic historical condition in Europe as the universal wisdom and religion for the entire human race. Climate emergency and the related rise in epidemics have more than certainly exposed the helplessness of a techno-scientifically advanced human race. The confidence of the scientifically modern humans to quote-unquote control life, both in human and non-human world, has time and again been shattered by the natural forces of our planet. The challenge before us, therefore, is A, to fast learn from the contingent conditions of meaningfulness and expose the life-threatening logic of a monetized profit economy masquerading as superior knowledge world, universal and inevitable for the survival of humankind on this planet. And B, to adapt to contingent conditions of meaningfulness, many lived practices, adherence to value-based ethics that have not only defied the techno-industrial modernity, but have prioritized values and ethics over the all-pervasive money economy. Values and ethics that can sustain life both in human and non-human world. Thank you, Manoj.
Thank you for your paper, Mallika, and for that very brief and crisp kind of overview of the problems, as you pointed out, of this monetized economy that masquerades as superior knowledge, and that is the sham of universalism of a particular kind, of scientific, of a very particular scientific location. Universalizing itself across the planet. And I think this is particularly, this panel is particularly important, especially in the context of the COP26 that is happening right now in Glasgow, which is the convention on climate change, and where all the leaders are currently kind of gathered to discuss all of these problems, but yet to find any answers or solutions. So this has been a very good paper to start off the panel on and the discussion on. Manoj, do you think we should take the questions right now, or do you want?
We can have the presentations together and
we can have the questions later. Okay, so we can go on to the next paper in this panel to be presented by Levin. And the paper title is Gandhi, Gathuri, and the Decolonization of the Anthropocene. Levin?
He's muted. Yeah.
Oh, hello everyone. Welcome to my presentation. So first of all, I'd like to thank the conference organizers and my fellow panelists for giving me the opportunity to present my paper in this wonderful conference. The title of my presentation is Gandhi, Gathuri, and the Decolonization of the Anthropocene. So first, I'd like to provide a brief overview of my presentation. Then I'll discuss Gandhian eco-philosophy and Gathuri's ecosophy to show the possible points of alliance between these two philosophical systems in the context of the Anthropocene. Then I'll end my presentation with concluding remarks. So we are living in the planetary age of the Anthropocene, otherwise known as the age of man. The Anthropocene is characterized by a profound climatic transformation of our planet, leading us to the 6th mass extinction. This exceptional planetary scale crisis compels us to question who is the anthropos of the Anthropocene. Contemporary theorists suggest that the Anthropocene is a deeply problematic concept because it hides troublesome differences between humans. Jairus Victor Groves suggests that we live not in the Anthropocene, but in the Eurocene, an epoch that is dominated by European colonialism. To facilitate engagement across diverse cultures for the purpose of decolonizing the Anthropocene, this paper seeks to understand possible points of alliance between Gathurian ecosophy and Gandhian eco-philosophy. Gandhian eco-philosophy is based on existential interconnectivity, which resists Western humanism's technocratic narrative of progress. Similarly, Gathurian ecosophy is based on a relational ontology of complex complication that resists modernity's biopolitical regimes. This cross-cultural conversation becomes pertinent when neoliberal capitalism is radically transforming the lives and landscapes of the planet, reconfiguring the registers, what Gathuri has called the three ecologies, namely those of the environment, of social relations, and human subjectivity. Gandhi's Swaraj and Gathuri's ecosophy would help us to understand the detrimental effects of the colonial Anthropocene. The condition of the global South is deeply unjust, still colonial. Therefore, the task of engaging with Gandhi and Gathuri in the Anthropocene is also a task of radical ecological imagination. So I'll try to elaborate on this project of radical ecological imagination by drawing their philosophical contribution. The Anthropocene, a rupture in the modern imaginary. The Anthropocene constitutes a rupture in the modern imaginary. Dipesh Chakraborty argues that human being is intrinsically bound up with the natural world through the collective effects of the species as a geological force. In the Anthropocene, Bruno Latour argues, humans and nature have been melted together and morphed into a strange geological, to be more precise, a geohistorical force. This strange geological force, characterized by the entanglement of human and nature, posed a challenge to the political, along with other human achievement, by removing the very grounds on which we might strategize. As Latour argues, the Anthropocene signals a crucial juncture of history, wherein the nature, instead of being reduced to a decor for human history, becomes a major protagonist by entirely bypassing the dualism of nature and culture. The natural time is ticking no slower than the speed of cultural time. The Anthropocene has challenged the artificial dichotomy between the essential humans and passive nature through understanding of the environment as an active protagonist. Timothy Morton argues that the Anthropocene signifies the end of the world, as the background, known as the world, which is meant to support human life world, appears to be contingent, volatile, and unpredictable. So we need to revisit Gandhi and Gathuri's political experiments if we want to locate ourselves ontologically, along with all our historical interests, in the new epoch of global warming, because the advent of the Anthropocene disrupts all of the modernist channels of human discourse, undermining their categories and overturning their assumptions. So Dipesh Chakraborty argues that we need to envision a new form of planetary politics, which is devoid of any myth of a global identity. So Bruno Latour also argues that the new universality consists in feeling that the ground is in the process of giving way. So that means the old discourses of globalization are becoming obsolete. So we have to envision a new kind of planetary politics. So which is basically based on habitability, not sustainability. So in this context, in this in the context of these contemporary Anthropocene discourses, I mean, Gandhian ideas are very relevant. So Gandhi revivified indigenous spiritual tradition by popularizing concepts like ahimsa, swaraj, and satyagraha to counter colonial modernity's prejudices, blind spots, and cognitive arrogance. With the advent of the Anthropocene, we must again question the universal claims of colonial modernity, which is the cause of the Anthropocene. Through this encounter with colonial modernity, we can refashion ourselves by invoking diverse identities of culture, race, gender, nationality, and ethnicity. Through our struggle against the Anthropocene, we can easily relate ourselves with the Indians who confronted modernity in its colonial guises. As Western modernity can be identified as the cause of the Anthropocene, this connection marks the definitive end of the legitimacy of the history of colonial modernity. Gathuri's ecosophy and Gandhi's eco-philosophy open a new avenue for us to understand this unprecedented condition in which we find ourselves, posing historical, political, and ethical questions that overflow our modernist assumptions and disciplinary categories. Jason Moore argues that Anthropocene idea brings forth a planetary imagination animated by the entangled cosmologies of anthropos, bios, and geo. Therefore, Gathuri's geophilosophy and Gandhi's eco-philosophy bear immense political significance in this new climate regime. Swaraj provides an alternative framework for envisioning society beyond the temporal confines of the Anthropocene. The concept has emerged from the Gandhian restoration of Indian tradition with significant global resonance. Though the concept achieved popularity during India's anti-colonial struggle against the British Empire, it doesn't merely mean national independence. Gandhi's Hind Swaraj and his other writings suggest that Swaraj encompasses individual as well as community autonomy and freedom, integrally coupled with the ethics of responsibility towards others. So Gandhi argues that Swaraj has to be experienced by each one for himself. Woodcock argues that Gandhi merely defined the politics of Swaraj in social, ethical, and spiritual terms, which maintained uneasy coexistence with political nationalism. So Gandhi's concept of Swaraj cannot be reduced to political nationalism, because along with national independence, he also focuses on interiority, this formation of subjectivity, and this self-care, and so on. The reason behind such unique conceptualization of Swaraj is what Ashish Nandi calls psychopathology of colonialism. The inner motive of all actions in the self-realization of the individual was the key to Gandhi's unique understanding of Swaraj. Gandhi's Swaraj was a response to the psychic violence of colonialism, perpetuated by a culture of adulthood, historicism, objectivism, and hypermasculinity. Gathuri advanced Delusian philosophy by elaborating ecosophical and cartographical dimensions and demonstrated how a mechanosphere covered the planet. Together, Deluge and Gathuri developed a geophilosophy which envisioned a new earth inhabited by new people. Gathuri suggests that an ecosophy is not merely an abstract paradigm. It calls for a radical change in views and beliefs, challenging long-established anthropocentric models ruling over the nature-culture dichotomy, the notion of dominance and property over other species, and ultimate premises of life. Deluge and Gathuri offer a range of concepts that can be useful to understand contemporary global problems, such as anthropogenic climate change. Those concepts also lead us to the kind of interdisciplinarity that the epoch of the Anthropocene requires. Gathuri foresaw, at least 3 decades ago, the ecological consequences of the Anthropocene, and as Gathuri predicted, the ecological crisis has intensified. Now it has become a global concern. Deluge and Gathuri's critical assessment of Western philosophy equips us for the decolonization of the Anthropocene. Their geophilosophy helps us to rethink the issues concerning subjectivity, agency, knowledge, and the truth that come from the Western philosophical canon. Deluge and Gathuri's philosophical project denounced the category of man as the source of history, knowledge, and praxis. But their critique of human exceptionalism, as Roth and Stark suggest, doesn't entirely deny the specificity of the human into all pervasive flow of life. In fact, Deleuze and Guattari's philosophy belong to the tradition that examines reality from the human perspective, considering all the limitations of anthropocentrism. Inspired by the Enlightenment, their philosophical endeavor was aimed at critiquing the structures that prevent human flourishing so that something genuine can emerge. Deleuze and Guattari don't denounce anthropocentrism simply to indulge in post-human eclecticism, which is not stable enough for any political commitment. Deleuze and Guattari provide an ontology which explicates the singular dependency of the human species on many layers of material flows which shape the world. Their anti-humanism is radically different from many post-humanist streams, such as object-oriented ontology, which tend to substitute the ethical legacies of humanism with political indifference. They don't think that human species is a parasite on the planet. Instead, they invoke the ethical question of philosophy, which propounds that life is collective and political. Gathuri derives from Deleuze's work to articulate his ecosophy, which paves an avenue for us to understand the contemporary dynamics of the Anthropocene politics. Gathuri engaged with the looming environmental crisis from the political vantage point of communism. Stepping beyond narrow-minded ecological politics, Gathuri's machinic ecology begins with a world system analysis of systematic disposition on various scales. Along with ecosophy, Gathuri also provides a new perspective on cartography, and he shows how understanding of the crisis of integrated world capitalism has to be multiscalar. He also borrows various terms from physics such as emergence, system, and chaos to understand what he calls integrated world capitalism. Gathuri redefines environmental ecology as machinic ecology and coins the term mechanosphere to explain the planet-wide entanglement of mechanical, architectural, and biological processes. This multidisciplinary approach to understand ecological crisis perfectly fits with the contemporary transdisciplinary discourses of the Anthropocene. Gathuri argues that integrated world capitalism, the next stage of classical capitalism, has changed its focus from exclusively producing goods to producing subjectivities. So basically, I mean, his argument resembles with Harden-Negri's argument. So basically, Gathuri is also saying that actually contemporary global system doesn't have any center of power. It is highly decentralized. And basically, the contemporary capitalism is focusing on, producing, subjectivity rather than producing, goods and other commodities. So material commodities. So ecosophy from Gathuri's viewpoint is a way to emancipate human relationship both within our own species and within nature. For Gathuri, ecosophy is threefold: environmental, social, and mental. Emancipation is possible by considering these three spheres of ecological praxis. New forms of valorization are necessary to resist the homogenesis of capitalistic values that create obstacles for emancipation. Resingularization follows a process what Gathuri calls heterogenic, which means the development of value on a differentiated ontological level. Gathuri's ecological praxis evokes the capacity to capture and active the heterogeneous, isolated, and repressed singularities in order to cooperate and build assemblages of subjectivities able to function as processes of reterritorialization. He envisions ecological politics as an everyday praxis that paves the way for emancipation. This ecological praxis is a continuous negotiation of meaning with and within our environment. So Gathuri also focuses on the culture of dissensus and the singular production of existence. And he also talks about new practices, new solidarities, a new gentleness, together with new aesthetic and new analytical practices to counter the homogenizing kind of tendencies of capital. Deleuze and Guattari deployed the concept of refrain to describe the process of attraction, subjectification, and territorialization, facilitating the formation of localized communities. A refrain is a territorial assemblage which enables the creative space of appropriation and identification, a place which can be identified as home. Gathuri's ecosophical perspective informs us that our oikos is the art, to be precise, an assemblage of geosphere, biosphere, and semiosphere. Diverse elements of the earth form localized ecological communities which are territorialized spaces of subjectification. Gathuri's ecosophy suggests that territorialized ecological communities emerge through nurturing refrains, exchanging emotions, thus enabling spaces of communication able to facilitate community members' participation in the milieu. So Guattari's concept of refrain is very important to understand his ecological praxis, ecosophy and ecological praxis. So to conclude, so I have tried to elaborate Gandhi and Guattari's understanding of emancipation, both individual and collective, in the context of the Anthropocene, an epoch that is characterized by ecological injustice, anthropogenic climate change, and global warming. Gandhi argued that Satyagraha, Swaraj, and self-transformation could be the only cogent responses to the violence inflicted by various forms of injustice, which includes climate denialism and climate injustice also. Gathuri and ecosophy also emphasizes on the importance of producing subjectivities, creating singularities, and valuing reterritorialization. An ecosophical worldview is intrinsically communitarian, which shows the necessity of a discipline of the self. So Gandhi and Gathuri, both of them are focusing on, interiority. I mean, to counter the external forces which are, repressive in nature. To deal with the planetary environmental crisis, Rosie Braidotti calls for an open-ended, interrelational, transnational, multi-sex, and trans-species flows of becoming, which would pave the way for new modes of expression and affirmative modes of relation to multiple others. Anna Singh mobilizes Gilles Deleuze's concept of assemblage, which, unlike the linear idea of progress, incorporates many voices, multiple perspectives, multiple ecological entities, and a polyphonous consideration of the life worlds of many species. Gandhi and Gathuri's visions of ecological praxis pave a new avenue for situated knowledge produced by collaborating agents, and also intra and interspecies interaction and becoming with. In the context of the Anthropocene, their ecological visions of political praxis would redefine the political task par excellence and lead us beyond the narrow confines of the purely human into an uncanny terrain of new alliances and new possibilities. It is only through such a political praxis, understanding our victimhood in alliance with other species, that we can become capable of collective action and meet the challenges of the Anthropocene. So these books and articles helped me to formulate my argument. So now I'd like to end my presentation with a quote from Gandhi. Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's needs, but not every man's greed. So here's another quote from Felix Guattari. Production for the sake of production, the obsession with the rate of growth, whether in the capitalist market or in planned economies, leads to monstrous absurdities. The only acceptable finality of human activity is the production of a subjectivity that is auto-enriching its relation to the world in a continuous fashion. Thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to your questions, comments, and suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you, Levin, for your paper. Those very, very pointed observations on the Anthropocene, especially in relation to Gathuri's ecosophy and its connections with Gandhian philosophy as well, especially centered on the notion of Swaraj, and of course other allied ideas and concepts such as Satyagraha. And I think one line in particular stood out for me when you were talking about Gandhi's concept of Swaraj, and where he said that it is not simply sitting still and leading away from that idea of a kind of passive resistance to a larger agential kind of subjectivity or the formation of a self-subjectivity, and which I found quite interesting, especially in the context of Deleuzian nomadicity. So the whole idea that of movement and not of sitting still leads us somewhat in the direction of nomadicity, of a nomadic subjectivity that is very urgently involved in the creation of a self-subjectivity or a dissenting subjectivity in light of everything that is I would say a totalitarian kind of captures of our imaginations, of our lives, of the planet itself. So in that sense, I think there is a certain idea of movement and nomadicity that is contained in Gandhi as well, and which relates across to Deleuze and Guattari, and which is something that might be that might be worth exploring as well. And of course, Gandhi is very, very anti colonial kind of stance, and which is also anti-Western notions of modernity, also give us very important pointers in the context of decolonization. So, and definitely in the context of decolonizing the Anthropocene, so to speak, as well. And this would have actually, engaged very well with the third paper that we had, which is a perspective from the cosmology of forest-dwelling people by Daniela, and who unfortunately could not be here, and which would have possibly given us a kind of a perspective in praxis in how decolonial practices could have been, how they can be formulated, how they are proceeding at this current moment in time. But be that as it may, I mean, I think both of these papers, Levin's and Mollika's, give us enough things to think about in the context of the Anthropocene, and especially related to decolonizing the Anthropocene, and how to move away from what Guattari would call the integrated world capitalism itself, and which itself, I think, where we can see that capitalism itself is attempting to turn its spaces into smooth spaces, for us to forget historicity, to forget the investments in various forms of hegemonies and various forms of fascisms. It is trying to turn its attention, our attention, away from these kinds of historicities, and attempting to turn itself almost as a kind of a facade of smoothness, which can be traversed, in certain ways. But of course, we know that kind of smoothness is quite a is a sham, so to speak. It is a facade that is propped up by various kinds of labor, and which Gathuri was attempting to chart as well in order to look at the formation of a certain kind of communism, or a communism to come, let's say. I would welcome questions to our panelists today. And I think we have the first question from Charles. Charles, do you want me to read out the question, or would you want to pose it yourself?
No, you can read it.
All right. Begins by thanking Levin for the talk. And Charles goes on to ask, I wonder if he might address also how these Gathuri ecosophical principles intersect with the different ways that Deleuze also raises ethical issues and modes of global thought.
Yeah, so basically Deleuze, didn't work particularly on ecology, but he developed geophilosophy, which is very close to Gathurian ecosophy. So, but Deleuze actually, in his books, actually, he engaged with so many issues. He didn't particularly focus on ecology, but Gathuri actually further developed his concepts to basically address the ecological issues, and particularly in his book, The Three Ecologies. So basically, Deleuze, Gathuri further developed Deleuze's ideas, and basically to illuminate his ecosophy. So, but Deleuze also Deleuze's geophilosophy also, closely intersects with, Gathurian ecosophy. So, it's very difficult to, distinguish these two philosophical systems because they closely intersect with each other, in many ways. This geosophy and ecosophy, yeah. Deleuze's geophilosophy and Gathuri's ecosophy, yeah. So these two systems are entangled with each other in many ways. Actually, very difficult to separate one from another. Yeah.
Right, Charles. If you are okay with that.
Yeah, I just got that. Sandhya, you're going to be giving a talk that
tomorrow
overlaps with what
That's
Levin
right.
was saying. So you're the other side of the coin. So you'll be sorting out that side, I think.
Hopefully, I'm not sure whether whether I'll be able to do it. It's all in my head, but hopefully,
that's a good spot to have it. Unfortunately, that's a 3 a.m. for me, so I might not be quite that aware. But thank you.
Thank you so much for noting that as well. And I see your cat, and many greetings to your cat as well. From Vinay to Professor Dasdar, how does provisional rational action successfully turn evidence into evidences in a methodological program which is conversant with the scientific method, and yet successfully refracts the knowledge practices which can focalize the simultaneity and coexistence of folk science, citizen science, nomadic science, and hegemonic science in the pursuit of a more dialogic and ethical knowledge project? How does this take place? Rather, how can this work of epistemic plurality or cognitive justice be undertaken in the current context of the political economic shifts that are transforming the very nature and purpose of the university? And that's a rather dense question. Mallika, if you're here, would you like to take this up? Mallika, you're muted. If you can unmute yourself.
A bit complicated, more than dense. So it would be better if the person is asked to ask the question directly, what exactly he's trying to, he has observations to make, it seems. rather than asking questions. He has certain opinions, and that is very evident in the question.
That's right. Vinay, would you like to pose the question?
If I may just flesh it out a little bit. Yeah, I mean, these are the problems of concision, perhaps. But the real challenge, the philosophical challenge, it seems, is coming back to challenging universalism per se. And there's a reason why the technocratic machinery in research and in speaking to larger systems of power, behind motivations underlying the nation state and a global consensus around science, how a certain kind of how the dominion of the scientific method in terms of how knowledge is to be pursued, how hypothesis testing is to be conducted, and how the tools of science evolve in time. And in terms of what Mam's presentation was about, they kind of speak to a certain economic base, a certain capitalist motive, and an engine of production of a certain kind of knowledge. So I was wondering, there are great attempts in science studies, and of course this is like a huge question. But even if I could get some speculative comments around how that conversation can begin to happen at the juncture of the university, which is in itself, undergoing a particular kind of change in terms of what kind of knowledge will be made more visible, in terms of outcomes, in terms of how the classic project of social engineering would continue to happen given the new tools of sciences. To use an example from the neurosciences, for instance, again, the conversation with philosophy is very ripe here, because you're going deeper and deeper into neuronal subsystems, rather than looking at the fact that consciousness can happen at a collective level of conversation outside of the human brain as well. So all these shifts, or how, and there are moves within sciences to kind of focalize and emphasize on this pluri-scientific turn. But how does one, from the social scientist, from the vantage of philosophy, come in and make a more compelling claim in terms of a cohesive methodology which can tie in much of the work in contemporary science studies? Yeah, sorry for the extensive kind of refraction of the question. Thank you.
No, it's okay. These questions only trigger thinking. So thank you for the question. Not that I have got the answers, and this is all about deliberating. But let me just try to make it more cohesive, and in my response, whatever I can reflect upon. I am not an expert to reflect upon the gamut of topics that you have brought up. To very begin with, because there are many things you're saying. To begin with, I am not particularly very bothered about the very, very superior or very high level or very advanced level human brain science research, with the neuroscience research, even trying to explore even outside human brain and through neuroscientific advanced research. I have no problem as far as they remain as scientific experiments and research per se. I do have problem when these advanced scientific research is being surreptitiously linked into the market for algorithm of artificial intelligence. And this entire algorithm of artificial intelligence is but how to make business leaders and business managers more efficient, more profit-oriented. There is no qualms about it. The advertisements we see on YouTube is all about business leaders and business managers, how this algorithm will work. Of course, common middle class would be given some benefits so that they get hooked onto it, as we have gotten hooked onto internet and social media. So when it comes to algorithms of artificial intelligence, it's a monster, it's a Frankenstein that is being unleashed. And thanks to humans who think that we are very smart, And I'm not a doomsday at all. I'm a very, very optimist person per se. But I think more humans deny the climate change. More humans deny the climate crisis. More humans deny the effects of 5G transformations and 5G internet connectivity. The more there would be typhoons and more hurricanes. Let them deal with typhoons and hurricanes and their artificial algorithms. I think we are just a huge global stage of drama is unleashing in front of us. As we speak, Chennai is in knee-deep water. As we speak, there are all kind of weather emergencies around the world. So there is no one answer, of course. There's no one answer. But there is definitely for the young minds like you. I am not that young, but at least our students in universities to seriously ponder how much technocratic they want to become, how much palm life they want to live with. If they think that sitting on the stairs of Jawaharlal Nehru University, they get the best of connectivity, and for that only they will enter the campus and nothing for anything else, then they would face the future. And thankfully, we belong to the non-internet generation, and we interacted with humans, and we could really value the university campus life. Yes, how to make the students involved in it. At least research, at least university level research, at least research on climate change, research on as these conference also has come up with, is being aired as much, and thanks to Manoj and others, as much as on YouTube. Whatever little benefits and fringe benefits we get out of this technological revolution, as much as it is on YouTube, as much as there is an awareness that these kind of techno-scientific models that are being pushed by big industries are but doomsday, it's kind of fastening the pace of doomsday for general public, not perhaps the ranch owners in France, or even then ranch owners are also under Atlantic threat. But yes, it's an amazingly, the digital divide is an amazingly divisive world that the world has gotten us into. So yes, to answer your questions, philosophically, how can you challenge this universalism, or how can you use the larger systems of power? Well, our job is to keep on prodding, keep on talking, keep on showing. And thankfully, so many things are happening around us climatically. So many challenges are taking place, whether it is the Dakota pipeline, whether it is the Minnesota and Minneapolis protests, whether it is the Guinea protest, as our previous speaker just talked about in French Guinea, whether it is the Kudankulam protest, whether it is the protest in Zongo in Sikkim against the NHPC dams on Tista. As long as we also highlight these struggles of humankind to retain whatever they have got from Mother Earth or Mother Nature. I don't shy away from using these terms, Mother Earth or Mother Nature. So as long as we can highlight it, that's what the university projects, university research projects and teachers can do. And I remember, just to end my answer, a few years back, around 10 years back, or maybe 7-8 years back, I had just joined GNU teaching. Yeah, it was in 2014. As usual, Professor Romila Thapar was speaking, and we had all gone on to a very, very crowded auditorium. And somebody asked Professor Thapar that why there has been there is such a plethora or such a deluge of materials on caste in Indian history or ancient Indian history and medieval Indian history, and all the historians are locating at the caste question. So Professor Thapa's response was, we were product of our time. So we were going through that, our research and our research production, were going through a time when caste question rather than class question was the most prominent that was thrown at us, and we all had to do research. I would have, or perhaps if I was a teacher now, perhaps you would have gotten more on environment in ancient India and environment crisis in medieval India and modern India. So it is the call of our time that makes our research. So the call of our time is environment. The call of our time is climate crisis, the climate chaos. So it would be at the same time the big business will go on with their projects, but the climate warriors or the climate people, concerned people, will also raise their voice, and university students at least can make themselves aware and choose their projects and research accordingly. That's it.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Thanks, Mallika, for that extensive answer and the response to Vinay's question, which is also a very, very pressing question, especially for us in the universities in the global South. And of course, all the pressures that we've been facing in JNU, in TU, everywhere, we've been seeing these shifts and these pressures to instrumentalize a certain kind of knowledge, and in the service of integrated world capitalism, let's say. Right. Do we have any other questions for our panelists today? I see familiar names here. Harish is here, George is here. If there are any questions. Right, I think I can, I have one question for Levin, and I think we can maybe end with that if there are no other questions. You mentioned the term habilitation or habitability. Would you like to kind of expand on that concept a little bit in the context of Gandhian and Guattari's philosophies?
Basically sustainability is rooted in developmentalist discourses. So, but the concept of habitability is rooted in planetary politics. It's it's not concerned with growth or development. So it is like it is concerned with this our the livability of human species along with other species in this planet. So so it's a shift from developmentalist discourses towards planetary politics, so which is concerned about so our livability, our in this planet with other species. So
right.
Yeah.
Would you say that constitutes a form of satyagraha itself or Swaraj in the context of Gandhian politics?
Yeah. So if you we can trace the prehistory of the concept of habitability, because habitability is a new concept. Basically, Dipesh Chakraborty and Gati Spivak, they are trying to basically construct this concept. So but this prehistory of this concept can be traced back to Gandhi. Right. So because Gandhi's concept of Swaraj, so it's it's closely it is basically based on habitability. So Gandhi didn't use the term, but it is there in his ideas.
I do find resonances of Heideggerian Mitsein and what Haraway also, I mean, Mitsein being with, and Haraway changing that to becoming with, and that in many ways, I think my response in a certain way to Vinay's question, which is again a very important question, is to perhaps think of Donna Haraway's conception of the cyborg as a kind of a war machine. And since we are all cyborgs in a sense in this age, and there is no kind of getting away from that, perhaps we can think about all of these concepts together and think about what it would mean for a decolonial practice of the Anthropocene through, let's say, certain concepts, for example, like Gandhi's Swaraj, and Haraway's or Heidegger's idea of Mitsein, and then becoming with to the idea of cyborg subjectivities, and how all of these can intersect and kind of maybe not coalesce so much, but cohabit into forming these new subjectivities as war machines. And for it perhaps it is important for all of us also to think about traversals of these striated spaces that we find ourselves in at this time, and to think about how to move and how to become nomadic subjects ourselves. And that therein precisely, I think, lies the greatest challenge. And like, I mean, in the universities, and how to create concepts as tools, or praxis as a tool to counter this large machinery of the state and capital. And we have been seeing this in India, for example, in the protests and in the kind of global outrage that followed as well, and the rise of certain kinds of authoritarian and totalitarian politics in the Indian state, and coupled with climate challenges and other crises that have beset us in the last few years. And I think we can think about new ways of formulating a certain kind of a war machine against, or a dissenting, or what Gathuri would call the dissensus of our collective subjectivities. So maybe that is something that we can think about, and to go ahead into the future, because I don't think we can dispense with the practices that we are all part of today. We cannot dispense with the technologies that we are all partaking of today. So I think the challenge would be to how to turn those technologies into war machines for ourselves. Yes, absolutely. I mean, thank you for that. Yes, placemaking, world making, self-making. Thank you. Thank you to all the presenters. George is here. George, would you have any comments to make?
No, thank you. Thank you, Sandhya.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. So we will see you at the next plenary session. I believe that the next session is the plenary, and see everybody there at the next session. Thank you so much.
Yes, please join us at 7:30 for the next session, and I'll be posting a link. So if you need to access it, you can do it from there.
All right.
It starts at 7:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time.
Thank you so much. See you all.
The link is in the chat box. Thank you.
Thank you.